This is part 5 of a series describing devices that might be used to play an LP. My intention was to build devices from turntable to loudspeaker and finally reach a concluding position where I'm once again able to listen to my LP collection using an audio setup where each part was perhaps homebrew, from soup to nuts you might say. In this episode we build a power amplifier using modern techniques. There are of course many great designs to choose from, such as Hiraga and Pass Labs, John Lindsley Hood and more. In this episode I'm going to go with a thing called a gainclone, which is built using an LM3886, but I might do the John Lindsley Hood Class A amp at some point in the future. Now there's an interesting lineage that precedes the 3886, quite worthy of discussion. In the mid-1970s, National Semiconductor produced a thing called the LM386, which is this little 8-pin device here. This is a 250 milliwatt device, ideally designed to run off of a battery. So it was used in consumer electronics. Not really that great in terms of distortion, like 10% when pushed hard, and it would be pushed hard because the lower power output would ensure that happened. But it was commonly used and is still in production even now. The LM380, which is this 14-pin device here, is much better. It gives 2.5 watts of power at about 3% distortion, and much less distortion when you don't push it quite so hard. And it could produce quite decent sound quality at low power levels. And this circuit here shows how easy it is to build something from that chip. It's not audiophile grade, but nonetheless a decent piece of kit. And the LM377 stereo version was equally impressive. However, none of these 1970s, 1980s parts were taken seriously by the hi-fi people. These devices just didn't have quite the low distortion specs that you would need, and nowhere near the output power, of course. 2.5 watts really isn't enough to drive hi-fi speakers in particular. Then in 1993, National Semiconductor introduced a series of chips, but in particular a thing called the LM3875, which was capable of 56 watts of power, with actually 0.1% total harmonic distortion across the audio range. Now, a Japanese engineer called Junji Kimura of 47 Labs, he used the 3875 IC to make this now famous gain card amplifier, which, while exceedingly simple, was very positively reviewed, and it spawned a DIY community of people that made devices called not gain cards but gain clones. The LM3875 part is now obsoleted, and there's an upgraded replacement, the LM3886, which is what I've got here. I don't know whether it's even going to focus. That looks okay. So the LM3886 is slightly more powerful at 68 watts, has better distortion figures at 0.03%. So this is quite a piece of kit now. It really does work very, very well. And we've reached a point where you can build a pretty decent stereo amplifier. We can conjure one up from essentially 2 of these parts here, a printed circuit board and a handful of parts. There are various implementations of the gainclone that you'll see on eBay and AliExpress, and I'd suggest going for the slightly more expensive versions that use a DC servo operational amplifier, which eliminates the potential for a DC offset on the output. So if you look at the spec sheet on this thing, the LM3886, it's got an input offset voltage of between 1 and 10 millivolts. And without a DC servo there, the speakers are going to see something like 10 to 100 millivolts if the gain is set to 10, which is not really ideal. So you probably do want the DC servo. Go for that. It doesn't cost any more really. Now, quite a while ago, I bought the printed circuit board and a bag of parts for next to nothing. I think it was about $30 or $30, I can't remember, but it wasn't terribly expensive. It took half a day to assemble, not a difficult construction. I would suggest a good quality transformer rather than going for a switch mode power supply, which is what a lot of people seem to do nowadays. even though the transformer is going to cost you more than the printed circuit board kit. Having built this amp a while ago, I don't really have much footage, but I'm going to take the opportunity to open it up, and here it is. In fact, I'll just put it forward. So I'm going to open this thing up, or have opened it up, but I want to replace the speaker terminals because I'm not really happy with these things here, and just fix a few bits of wiring while I'm at it. And then finally, just to finish, oh yes, and of course the point I made earlier, this is a decent quality transformer, so if you can scrounge one out of something, that's great. Otherwise that's going to cost you £50 plus, but it does give you better quality sound. And then finally, just to say that this case here is actually a copy of the very famous Quad 405 power amplifier. Beautiful thing, again from the usual Chinese sources. It makes a lovely job, and also the heatsink on the front is very effective in terms of getting the heat out from the LM3886s, which you can see down here. So they're sat there and there, and they put the heat into this block, which then goes into the heatsink. So it does make a very attractive unit, although it's costly. So here you can just see me finishing off some bits and bobs on that amplifier, changing the loudspeaker connections that I wasn't happy with, and I did some changes to the phono cables as well, and replaced the M3 bolts that were holding the LM3886s down onto the heatsink because they weren't really very good. They were plastic bolts, so I've replaced those with some nice metal ones. And really that's it. So that amplifier now is back together again and goes on my shelf of homebrew parts. And really the next thing is just to do the speaker piece, which is the final piece, and then the homebrew system is done.